Welcome to the KSS podcast, the Kinetic Spine and Sport podcast. I get to play host. I'm Dr. Luke, and today I have Mr. Jon Jamieson from JP Fitness, who's right across the street from us. We're going to be talking about how we collaborate together, work together, and one of the other topics that we're going to talk through a little bit more is youth sports and where does that fall into our world. What are some of the things that we do to support that world, and just some of the things that we kind of see with that. Before we get started, thank you to the Moondogs production for helping us put this on, giving us this studio space, and making this the thing. So, Jon, I guess we'll start. Let's just let you give people a little bit about your background.
Sure.
And then we'll jump into the youth sports stuff. And I'm going to turn my chair because I'm going to turn and look at you while we talk and not worry about the camera.
So, big thing for me, when I first wanted to get into a career or a passion or a profession was looking at staying with some kind of athletic background. Mm-hmm. So I initially wanted to become an athletic trainer, and that was something that I was passionate about, and MSU here has obviously a great program for it. But as I got into it, more of an introduction to it, I just realized that it wasn't something that I was super passionate about, or it wasn't really where I wanted to meet people and how I wanted to be involved. I ended up transferring to the University of Minnesota, and that's where I got my bachelor's degree in kinesiology, and I worked as a personal trainer in the rec center at the U of M campus. And so got a lot of experience there working with general population, learning different aspects of fitness, putting myself through those things as well. So I've done a physique show, I've done a marathon. I've tried to do some of these things that I look at hey, these are very challenging events that you can really kind of test your body's limits in going into them. And how do you, how can we do them?
Yeah. Was that, when you were working as a personal trainer there, was that a work study type of job on campus, or was it just a separate thing?
It was just separate. It was just a job.
Okay, I was curious because it makes me think my work study jobs in school was I was a cadaver dissector in lab.
Oh,
a little different.
Yeah, that's a lot of different.
Yeah. So
anyways. That was that was just a job I applied for. It ended up matching up well with what I was looking to do, and just something I got really passionate about. I enjoy meeting people in the gym, people that want to better their health and their wellness, and youth sports. Throughout that time, I actually coached, what grade? I think they're fifth grade. Yeah, fifth grade football over at Orono High School, or Orono Elementary, I guess you would. So I was an assistant coach there. So I've always kind of had this pull back into sports and how to, I think, just because it's been so impactful for me and something that I enjoyed as I went through high school, that it really kind of shaped my outlook on life and how we can live the longest and the healthiest and have a really high quality of life. And I think it's really important that kids, when they're starting out, that they find that kind of same excitement out of it, and they see the benefits that can come from being in shape and being in a sport as well, and all of the benefits that go with that. So yeah, that's kind of where I started. I worked for the U of M. When I worked at FIU as I did my graduate. I did a semester of graduate school. It's all that I wanted to do in Miami. Not that school was that tough. I think Miami was that tough. And so I was I'm done with this. And so I ended up coming back. I worked for Lifetime. And started JP. And JP has been running now for 8 years, which is pretty crazy to think about.
Yep.
I just saw your post 8 years as well.
I literally posted today on Instagram that my graduation from Cairo school was 8 years ago today.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's cool.
It's wild.
Because that was about the time that we moved into our location, downtown Mankato. Was right around here 8 years ago.
Yep.
And I ended up gutting that whole place. But yeah, that's where my start came from, and that's really where I was. In football, I was in basketball, I played a little baseball. A lot of things that I enjoyed. I enjoyed being competitive. Some might say I'm hyper competitive. I think maybe healthy, unhealthy sometimes, but
sure.
It's what drives me and what makes me excited about these things. And when we talk how that ties back to youth sports, that's kind of a field that I've gotten myself back into. Like I said, I've coached a little bit there we're now doing like JP Performance, which is our version of putting a program together and working with athletes and helping them improve and excel in their respective sport and where they're at now.
What got like you into sports as a kid? Because as I'm been like thinking through this topic, I'm trying to think back like what was the draw for me? Like why did we do it? Because when I think back about my youth sports experience, like a lot of it was like really fun.
Yeah.
But it's like how everybody kind of gets into it in their own way. It's like what was your thing that like got you into youth sports?
You think back like I think one really influential thing was like my friends. I think I involuntarily was signed up. Like I wasn't willingly signed up for soccer.
Sure.
But someone put me in soccer and I played soccer for a couple of years. And maybe that's kind of where I found my competitive edge a little bit too, is just being kind of in competition. But yeah, I think most known was like my friends were doing it. I had a friend who we liked to be outside. We liked to play sports and kind of compete with each other. And that was, that's kind of what drove me right away to get into it and kind of got me hooked of like, yeah, like how can we get better? How can we do this? Like, how can we just play? Like, I remember we would just play like pickup football in random yards, like either at the park or at a friend's house, like in their big yard if they had a big yard. After school, we'd be like, hey, where are we going to play pickup football? And we would just get like 10 of us together and play 5-on-5. And I think that was always fun as you grew up and like, you had some organized sports, but not everything was organized as much as it is now, as it was back then.
Right. And when I think about like my youth sports stuff, like my parents met playing co-ed softball.
Oh yeah.
And then I was born, and then I apparently like was just brought around the softball field in a wagon as a kid.
Yep.
So like I literally don't remember life before being at Caswell.
Yeah.
And so it's like growing up to me, it was like, oh yeah, we go to softball Tuesday night, Thursday night, or whatever it was, and my parents like very much normalized it. Like they were both athletes growing up. And played a whole bunch of like various things, and because of them just like being exposed to it, it was like, well, yeah, of course we're gonna grow up and like play sports. Yeah. And as you get older and you learn from being a little hopefully less naive, like I also learned like that's not everybody's experience. Like some people have parents that don't play sports at all.
Yeah, I mean that's like. My parents owned a small town bar. It was called Jamie's Pub. They started it in like 83. And I think my dad and my mom, my dad was probably more into athletics, but my dad was 46 when I was born, so I don't really know how much he was still competing or trying to compete.
Sure.
And so they both didn't really play sports. They were into it. My dad would bleed purple, huge Vikings fan. So I also now bleed purple.
5-0, baby.
Yeah, let's go. So yeah, it's just crazy. Like I picked up on it just because, yeah, I just enjoy being active. You had a couple buddies that would do it too, and that's really went with it.
Yep. And when I think back to like our neighborhood that we grew up in, again, like I feel like I got super lucky. We had, I think there were 4 or 5 different families in our little cul-de-sac that had a park in the middle of it. Yeah. So like I grew up across the street from 5C's preschool in North Mankato, for those that know where that is. So like we had a swing set, 1 basketball hoop, and 1 monkey bars, and then it was just like open grass.
Yeah.
But we had a neighborhood full of kids, and everybody was kind of at like various ages. But we would literally like everybody walked to the park, and you brought whatever piece of equipment you wanted, and like someone would show up with a bat and a wiffle ball, someone would show up with a basketball, someone would show up with a frisbee, and we'd basically be like, all right, rock, paper, scissors, who gets to pick what we're playing today? And then you pick, and then like everybody just shuts up and plays. Oh, cool. And then we'd be out there for hours until someone's mom probably yelled out the front door like, hey, it's dark out, get inside. And then you run back inside. And like you just did that over and over again. And you talk about organized versus unorganized. But at the end of the day, whether it's organized or not, it still needs a space to happen.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the things that a lot of people probably run into is either they don't have a space for it to happen, or the spaces are all taken by other organized things, or whatever it may be, and it's also just like harder to find nowadays.
For sure.
So then it's interesting to think about like the different environments and different settings where like when I drive around town or run around town or whatever, I'm always pumped when I get to parks that there's people, because I feel like I've gone through a couple of phases where COVID was just weird.
For sure.
COVID for a while, right? Like we didn't see anybody outside.
Right.
And then eventually, I think towards like the tail end of COVID, I started seeing more people outside than I had ever seen before. Mm-hmm. But I think some of that was like a pendulum effect of like they've been cooped up inside for so long that now it's like, oh my gosh, we can go outside.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just like one of the trends that I think of.
Yeah. I growing up in Pemberton, there's only one other male. Really, there's like 4 of us around the same age group, but there was one other male that was my age. Mm-hmm. So we would grow up playing catch together, like fall, throw the football around. When it was winter, we probably didn't go outside as much, but we get out there and whatever, play in the snow and just do what kids do. And then when it came to spring, it was like, get the baseball out and let's play catch with the baseball. So it was nice that I had him, because in a town of 250 people, it wasn't that him and I were the only ones. And so it was crazy that happened. And how to get carted into like St. Clair every once in a while to hang out with like my high school or my elementary friends. But yeah, it's just funny how you end up like navigating, finding it, and how it kind of finds you in other ways too.
Mm-hmm. Let's use that to just like talk about kind of the idea of like seasonal training, right? And like we can look at that from a sports perspective too, but also like almost a life perspective, because that's one of the things when you and I first started talking about this. One of the topics that always pops up with youth sports is the concept of like specializing, and in like is there a good timeline for that versus not a good timeline for it? Because, in order to get really, really good at something, we have to spend more time doing it. But if we spend too much time doing it too soon, then sometimes we don't get to the place that like would actually let us get to like that high end level. You know what I mean? So I guess tell me from like a training perspective, like what are some of the thoughts that you have around like seasonal training? Like when you talk to younger athletes, what are some of the things that you talk about with that?
So now that we've kind of gotten into this field, and like what I notice and what I think it works the best is when we look at like the summer season. School gets so busy, and you can go on like how many more things are happening than there used to be. But to me, summer is the best time. I mean, unless these kids at the age of like 16 or 17 have started to specialize into like summer baseball, and that's where they're at. It's like if you're between the ages of 12 and 16, if we're working with you, the summer for me is like the perfect time to really like hit an intensity phase. A lot of these kids are new to exercise and movement and understanding their way around a weight room. So. But to me, I think that's really where we can try to like push some limits, and then as we get into the school year, into the season, they have their studies now. If they're in a sport in the fall, if they're in the sport in the winter, it's just really try to like hit home like technique, just making sure you're building the habit of staying consistent with exercise. In my opinion, you're not looking at doing any kind of like maximal effort when it comes to these lifts. Like we're staying between like 60 and 80% of maximal effort.
Sure. Yep. One of the things that I've noticed as I follow, like, there's a bunch of different really good pages, obviously, on social media, but, like, people that maybe they specialize in, like, training a certain sport, but I feel like there's been a big change and a good change into how people approach in-season training compared to, like, the way that they used to. You know, I feel like it was pretty extreme. Either people would say, hey, we're in season, so we're not going to lift at all.
Yep.
Right? And like,
yep.
we're just gonna
throw
grind
off their
away
shot. It's gonna do this.
we're just gonna grind away at the practice minutes, and we're just gonna do layups for 4 hours, and you know, and let it all be practice time. And then there's people on the other side of the spectrum that say, like, we're not going to change a thing. We're still going to be like pushing heavy weight. We're still going to be, you know, breaking down the body and doing all these different things. And as I've learned more about it, from my perspective, like, there's kind of a sweet spot in the middle. Because for some sports, if you're only peaking like once a week, if you're playing one game a week, you know, you might not be peaking enough to like maintain just by playing that game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Versus if you're playing, you know, let's say you have like 2 to 3 games in a week, well, you're hitting enough peak intensity activity during the games that, okay, maybe you don't need to like peak again in your training.
For sure.
Right? So,
yeah, for me, hitting those peaks, it's making sure that we're not exhausting it to the sense of like, okay, I don't want to see really any maximal efforts in like the strength aspect, because that's just gonna trigger the recovery to now take a week or 2 to get there. So
Sure.
if we're going too heavy, even if there's 1 game, you know, to 5 games, like, to me, we should be avoiding that kind of breakdown of the energy system for those kids. So I'm always looking at it like, you know, what can we do in season that's going to allow them to obviously have their peak performance during the competition, and what we have to avoid from a lifting perspective during that time. And what would, like, I had one kid talk to me that I thought was really interesting. He's like, I have a 16-year-old son. It was his buddy who plays football, and I was like, well, you got to lift this summer. And he's like, no, I'll leave that for football. I'll get stronger during football. I'm like, no, I don't know who you've been talking to, but that's not it. Like, you need to be stronger and get out of that peak so that we can recover there. You're at the strength that you have, and then we can start focusing on the competition aspect of it.
Right. Yeah, it's like, it's hard to build and perform at the same time.
Yep.
Right? It's like the body just does better when we're able to almost divide and conquer what our focus is. Because then you can kind of lean into those things even a little bit more. Like if you're just in the grind of a training cycle, awesome. And you can lean into it, and you don't have to worry about, oh man, like, I gotta pitch on Friday, so like I don't want to do any upper body stuff leading up to that. Well, now you're taking away from like the training that you can do, right? If it's like an off season thing.
Correct.
Versus if you're in season, well, then you lean the other way. You don't train quite as hard, and you lean more into like, okay, what's going to keep my body healthy? What's going to keep my body feeling good enough to perform at a high level? Yes, we can perform and still not feel fantastic, but I would argue that people probably don't have their best performance on days that they feel awful.
Right.
And that's something that, from the clinical side, what I end up talking to a lot of people about, whether they're like high school athletes or college athletes, it's like, if you're coming into me on a Monday in the clinic and like you feel terrible Monday and you have like a game, let's say Thursday, we might have to make some decisions Tuesday, Wednesday, so that we can get to the game in a good spot.
Yeah.
And what ends up being, I think, hard for them is they've been taught, like, well, I can't take any like time off at practice, or I can't take a step back at practice to let my body catch up. It's like,
yeah.
And so I think a lot of people get stuck in this pattern of like, they're either being told to do too much or they're asked to do too much, and their only strategy is like, go harder until you can't.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, being flexible.
Well, and that's what I think has grown a lot in the sport field, is the recovery aspect. And I think there's so much value that's overlooked when it comes to like a readiness assessment every day. Like, one thing one of the high school coaches, that performance coach I had, he just graduated high school, was one aspect they look at when it comes to like readiness for your workout that day is like just doing the vert jump. And seeing how that is in comparison to what your vertical jump is.
Sure.
And that's going to let you know how ready your body is to push during certain lifts, right?
Sure.
So I thought that was really intriguing. It's just unfortunate because it's a fine line, and especially with kids, and when I say kids, I speak like specifically like that 12 to probably 17 or 18. Because the kids that will take it seriously will find a way to give you an answer that is probably pretty true to how they're feeling. But the kids that don't want to do anything are probably going to tell you that they're feeling worse than maybe they actually are.
Sure.
So I think that's always a fine line for me, because you'll get the kids that want to put the effort in, and you'll get the kids that just don't seem to see the value in it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that I try and think about with that is, especially that like 12 to 16-year-old age group, or even younger, a lot of kids just don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, like they don't even have that awareness to it. And I try and, I would say, lean some of that responsibility to, you know, to the parents and to the coaches.
Yep.
That's something that comes up during my appointments all the time. Like I'll ask one of the younger athletes, hey, how did it feel? How did your practice go? How did your game go? And try and get a good answer out of them. Let them just speak freely. And then after I get their answer, a lot of times I'll lean over and look at the parent and then ask for their feedback. And, you know, when their feedback matches up, that usually tells me, okay, this parent isn't in tune with what their kid is feeling and going through. We're probably going to be more successful at managing, versus if a kid gives me one answer and a parent gives me a totally different answer.
For sure.
Then it's like, okay, like how do we decipher this? Like we need to figure out how we can get on the same page, because then we can make better decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that outlook of it. It does rely more on the parent or the coach in those situations. Kids can recover quickly. You know, that's one kind of amazing thing.
Fast.
About those kids, about like their energy systems and how they come back. Like when we talk probably more like older high school, college age, you know, we don't want to be seeing many PRs when we're in season, right? Like we're not going for that. And you can maybe chalk this up to like newbie gains, in my opinion, but like kids that are learning how to lift and like starting to understand how their body works, like they might lift a little heavier. It's not like our focus, but they notice that they can challenge themselves. And one thing that I like to look at with kids too, to try to get in tune with and get them in tune with how hard they're working, is like their rating of perceived exertion. And there's one thing when we do like maximal effort baseline tests, I find it really valuable to know, okay, on a scale 1 to 10, how hard do you feel like you work? 10 being you couldn't pick that weight up. And I'll get kids that tell me like a 7. And I'm like, cool, do you want to stay there, right? Do you want to go any heavier, or are you good here? Because this is our first time with some kids. And they're like, yep, I'm good with that. So my goal then is, how can I get this individual child more comfortable with utilizing this weight and like doing this movement? Like now maybe we only go up 10 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever it is, but I want their RPE to be like a 9. I want them to feel comfortable pushing to a 9. And the weight is directly going to, you know, be a direct correlation to that as well. But I think that's so important, is just making them more confident with these movements too. Like, oh yeah, I can deadlift. Like, let me show you how, you know?
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting parallel between like RPE stuff and also the way that I look at like pain scales. Because again, like when those things match up, when somebody can like tell me like, yes, that really hurts, like that is an 8 out of 10, and be accurate about it, again, we can make better decisions. So if you can take a kid through a workout and he can tell you, hey, that was like mid-level intensity, 5 out of 10, I feel good, you know, it's enough of a push where, you know, I have to try, but it's not so much that like I'm not worried about pushing it further. And you can kind of help them like hone in like, yeah, that's a true 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
You know, or like, yep, that's a true 9. Like, yep, we're pushing it, but like we're not going to go till the wheels fall off.
Right.
Because the other thing that I think about is when you put kids in a game, if they're driven and competitive and whatnot, like they're just going to go. So if they haven't lived in that 8 to 9 RPE zone and you send them out on the field and now they're going from like 5 to 10, like that's a huge jump for their body.
Yeah.
Right? So it's making them comfortable at each of those levels so that when they get into a game or they get into even a harder training session, like they're comfortable with that discomfort. And like that's where the magic happens, right? Because then kids can be more self-aware. They're in tune to what it feels like for their body, so they know when to push and they know when to pull back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big key, and I think that's what's important, especially with like how many different things kids have available to them now, with all the different leagues or off leagues, you know, like fall ball, summer ball, winter ball, whatever those things may be, you know, like summer hockey leagues, and being able to know like what their limits are. I mean, that just makes it way more important.
Yeah, and it, you know, that puts, as I kind of think through, like, I don't have any kids, but I'm sure my kids are probably going to play youth sports. And it makes me think through, like, okay, what happens when my kid is 12 and, like, he really wants to play baseball? Okay, we play baseball. But I'm also probably going to tell him, okay, here's your baseball season. What else are we going to do? Because in those earlier phases, that's really, like, the best time to just build an athletic base.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to expose that kid to a whole bunch of different activities that just challenges his or her coordination. And knowing that like that happens in that earlier phase where like the physical phase happens later, like as their body matures, as they get taller, bigger, stronger, you know, that's when we get into more of like the high skill and the high force, high speed stuff that's more like on the physical demanding versus the neurology demanding side.
Yeah.
And then teaching them that like the way to push those skills looks different, right? Like I wouldn't want a kid to say at 10 years old, yep, I'm a baseball player and that's all I'm going to play.
Yeah.
And I think unfortunately we're in a time right now where youth sports is pushing that way, and whether it's new showcase teams, new club teams, spring, summer, fall teams, whatever it may be, and a lot of that evidence is the increase in like overuse injuries for kids. Like more kids are having Tommy John surgery than ever on their elbows. More kids are having stress fractures.
Yeah.
More kids are, you know, whether it's foot, hip, you know, stuff like that. And it's hard to, you know, turn down an opportunity to do something more that you like. But we also can't expect like 12-year-old kids to understand the wisdom of, hey, just wait till you're 18.
Yeah.
You know?
No. And they actually understand it less as they get older too, and they get closer to that 18.
Right.
Way more difficult. Seeing those overuse injuries it's frustrating, and it is tough because, you know, you want to find a good balance for these kids of like, we want to push to make you a better athlete, but at the same time, you know, we need to be conscious of how hard we're pushing and what we're doing to support you otherwise, because they have all these different, you know, I would say leagues they can get into now. Then kind of bringing it to my field where they can, you know, come do some training and learn to do different movement patterns. And if you push too hard there, well, like now you just have this culmination of this body's just being maximally or so, you know, pretty close to that full exertion. And now, yeah, you're literally just waiting for an injury to happen where it can. So that's why it's important to me, especially in our field, like myself included, but a lot of my performance coaches have played at the collegiate level. I should say I haven't, but my performance coaches have, and so it's important to me when they're training and that they have that background, that they understand, you know, even working with youth, like what's the right thing to do? How do we structure this workout to show them how to properly move their body, how to do these lifts, and then at the same time, how do we have fun?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a big thing for me too. And that's something we haven't talked about yet. But having fun with it all is also really important, because if it's just work, grind, drill sergeant style, they're not going to want to come back.
Totally.
I mean, I don't know if you can think of a time in your life, like, where something was just, like, too much and you're like, no, that wasn't fun. I don't want to go back to that. You know, I'm trying to think myself, but I just know, like, usually if I didn't have a little bit of fun, or I wasn't able to, like, you know, show off a little bit of skill or something, it just wasn't good for me.
Yeah, and that's, I've always tried to keep fun a high enough priority where there's, like, always a feel for it. You know,
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you can't have hard practices. It doesn't mean that you can't have hard training sessions. It doesn't mean that you can't do things like you don't want to do. But you can do it with the right attitude. You can do it with the right variation of things, and in that like doesn't have an age requirement. You know, like, I bet probably the gym members that make it to your gym the most are probably the ones that also have the most fun there.
Yeah.
Somehow, right? Whether it's fun being in that social environment, fun because you like working with a certain coach, fun because you like the music, like, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that I would tell my athletes a lot is, like you got to let it be fun. You can't force fun. You can't just, like, get in someone's face, like, you're going to have fun today.
Right.
It's probably not going to work that way.
No.
But, like, you got to find ways to attach that to it. And as I was kind of prepping for this podcast and, like, talking to other people in youth sports, I asked one of my coaches from back in the day, who had a long coaching history of high school sports and then some summer sports and whatnot, and I asked him, like, if you had to advise a young student athlete on how to just, like, have a successful athletic career, like, what would the thing you would encourage them the most?
Yeah.
And this guy, as a coach, was, like, known to be, like, a hard coach. Like, our practices were, like, organized, lined up. Everybody had a job. You knew you were going to work hard. If you didn't work hard, you were maybe going to get called out. If you didn't execute, like, we were all going to learn from it. And so, like, in my head, I'm prepping for this, like, hard answer. Yeah. And he just goes, like, you got to make it fun somehow. And I was like, what? Yeah. But then as we talked through it, he's like, there's so many different things that can make it fun for someone. And for some kids, it's literally hang out with your friends. It's like you and your buddy growing up, you guys played catch every season because it was fun. And, like, you just got to hang out.
Yeah.
For other people, like, maybe they like the flashiness of playing in a game in the crowd and, you know, stuff like that. He said, but there's going to be some people too that just, they enjoy seeing themselves get better at something. Yeah. And he's like, when you can attach progress and, like, self-progress to fun somehow, like, that's a pretty powerful equation. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the flashiness of, like, you know, how many touchdowns did you score? You could have the worst kid on the team score a touchdown, you know, luckily, and get all the praise, but the other people that were working hard, training hard, you know, they got better in the things that you can't measure. They don't get the same reinforcement. So you almost have to, like, teach it or show examples of it, of, like, hey, we're getting better in these other places. That's also fun. Yeah. And then let that kind of pour over. And that, like, a couple of things that I've worked on, you know, through my last now 12 years of training is just different, like, facets of training, and that I can get some kind of specialization in. So one thing that I do, like, corrective exercise specialist, is in a setting where, like, if you're working with someone working on something very technical in your field, and then you hand them off to me, that it makes it an easier transition because I can understand where you were and where we can take them now and transition them into fitness. Another thing is, like, youth fitness specialist, in that
is so much of the research there just shows like we get these kids have to learn technique, but they can learn their motor function, they can learn their coordination, they can learn their balance, they can learn explosiveness still through play.
Mm-hmm.
And the play still has to be a big part of it. And the one thing parents always want to see when they bring kids to me is that we teach their kids how to do things with proper form, and like I think some parents too look at it like, man, if I would have done this younger, I would be in a better spot than I am now because I just picked this up like 5 years ago, or I just picked this up last year, or
Sure.
or whatever their experience might have been, but it happened in their adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's important to me, but it's also important that like we're doing that and we're creating the fun with it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you really start to forget how many things that you did like as a kid. And I've learned this as I've watched, my kids grow up and pick up on that. It's like you used to do these things that like we kind of re-imitate in some of the things that we train or we do in fitness. That's like, it'd be weird if you did it now. Like it'd be weird if you were coloring in a deep squat form while you're just like coloring a picture, like you look at a kid doing that.
JP coloring class.
Yeah. Everyone has to be deep squat though.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's just funny, like you don't realize how many of those things, like when you're just playing, that actually impact how well you can perform and how you can learn how your body moves.
Totally. And I'm sure I often win the title of weirdest gym member at your gym sometimes, because like the program that I'm on right now,
You do some weird things.
I do some weird things. Yeah. But that's part of that is on purpose. Like the program is geared towards like doing things that like can be fun or can be different, and they may not be like super technical orthodox movements, but it's that way by design.
And that's like, I was thinking about it after I did that workout with you that day, and we were doing those plyo push-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, this is like a depth jump,
Mm-hmm.
but applied to upper body.
Yeah.
Which is funny because it's something like, it didn't click with me until afterwards. I was like, oh yeah, I was just going from like this like lower surface, dropping down and then exploding up into a higher surface. And like how fun that was. Like that's something that you don't normally do, and how you can continue to mix things up and do weird things. Like part of our group program, trying to throw in some weird things. Like
Right.
like this is, I don't know if I'm into this, and I'm like, but it's gonna be good. Like trust me, it's gonna be good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's certain things that you can only learn in that gray area, right? Like if all you do is you go into the gym and you do the same like 3x8 bench, 3x8 squat, and like you don't do various things, are you still going to get stronger? Sure.
Yeah.
But like, could you get even more stronger by doing other variations, testing your body slightly differently? Like the body loves variety when it comes to like adaptation, right? So it's like the more that you can work around those things, the better those things are also going to get. Like a baseball example of that. So like Paul Skeens, I don't know if you know who that is. He's a rookie pitcher for the Pirates. I think he just won Rookie of the Year.
Okay.
But the dude's a monster, but part of his baseball warm-up is throwing a football across the field.
Oh, yeah.
And like Pat Mahomes for the Chiefs, I think he was a baseball pitcher for sure through high school, and I can't remember if he played in college too. But it's like a lot of these higher level athletes have a high level of overlap with like their sports and skills.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's hurting them.
No. Well, they were showing that CJ Stroud does kind of the same thing.
Mm.
That he's like, I think he's got, a baseball that he throws, and he's got all these different sport balls that he warms up with. I don't think he hits a golf ball before he starts, but I mean, I don't know, maybe that could help.
You're just trying to plug golf, yeah.
Dude, golf for sure. No, but it is interesting when you see how these, all these different sports correlate. And like you said, like specializing too early, in my opinion, you're just like kind of pigeonholing a kid and potentially making that sport less exciting for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's, with my experience in the college athletics world, like whether it was my teammates or some of the athletes that I coached, but like burnout's a real thing. And like it is, yeah, you know, I wish I knew the percentage of how many athletes either end their career earlier than they need to because of burnout, or they feel like the tail end of their career isn't, you know, as fulfilling as they thought because they were burned out. And you know, I look at athletics as just like a trajectory where like each year should get better somehow. Even let's say like even if you don't get maybe faster or stronger, or maybe you don't statistically play better, but like, you know, you're hopefully smarter, right? Like hopefully you manage things better. Like there's just so much opportunity for every year to be better. Um, but we have to be in a good situation to like take advantage of that. And that's probably one of the reasons why I'm still involved in a lot of high school, college sports, especially in the past, was like if I could go back and do my college career, I would do it in a second. Like
Yeah.
it was just it was awesome. And like yeah, there was some luck to it. I think there's some luck with everything, but like there were just a lot of things that went really well, and I was surrounded by really good people, and just happened to have a good environment for it, and then was willing to work hard and be consistent. And I wish everybody would feel that way. I wish everybody could walk out of college athletics thinking like, God, that was the best. Even high school athletics, even if you don't go to college, like.
Yeah, I didn't take athletics as serious as I feel like I could have, in the sense of like wanting to get better, wanting to, you know, work together as a team. A lot of my exercise and lifting was probably more vanity driven than it was performance driven.
Sure.
But for me, you know, like there potentially was an opportunity. Maybe I could have played like D3 or D2 sports in some realm. But I just wasn't interested. And I think, you know, looking back, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot that can be said for even playing at that level, and playing with a team and having that camaraderie, and still just being able to compete, you know, like that's a big thing for me. It's like being able to compete, and now of course it's in like co-ed leagues or
Sure.
you know, like any kind of adult leagues, but it's still just fun to compete, and you can't get that back,
Right.
you know, and that's always fun to me.
Yeah. And this kind of gets back to like the adults being able to hold the responsibility for kids, right? Like I was talking to someone that's, you know, in the business world, is in like an upper management position, and we just ended up talking about like work and like, and somehow sports got into the equation, and he like right away said like we love hiring athletes. You know, he's like, whether they played college sports or they at least had a background in sports. He's like, because those people have had to learn how to work with a team. They've had to learn how to be competitive and work hard. And so much of that gets lifted out of the athletics box, and you can put that right into your professional box. And like those things still work on a professional level.
For sure.
And that's just another thing that it's like even more of a reason to make sure that we're creating good spaces for kids to like do these things and to enjoy them, because if they don't have the space to like learn it, then we're basically taking an opportunity away.
It's so much more about their experience, how to support them, and just making sure that every adult that's invested in that knows that like we're here for the kids.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the other things that I read when it talked about just like obstacles of youth sports was burnout was one of the main reasons that they found kids stop playing sports early, and then pressure from parents was the other one.
Yeah.
And like that's just a tough space to live in, because I'm sure like most parents just want the best for their kid, and the best for their kid means, you know, they want them to be good at sports and to be able to do all the things. And it's just a hard spot, right? Because like that doesn't always come across to kids that way necessarily. And again, like, kids don't have the depth of understanding to be like, oh, well, like, dad keeps driving me to the batting cage because he just wants me to be a better person. It's like, no, they're probably thinking like, God, this is the third day in a row dad's bringing me to the batting cage. Like, does he think I stink at hitting, or know, whatever it is? So, yeah, it's just so much of it comes through in like the messaging that the kids hear, and the advice and the guidance and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's also like it. I don't know if I just have more defiant kids than anybody else, but like my daughter has no interest in a ball sport at this time. No matter how much I try to make it cool, she doesn't like it. But it's it's one of those things that like maybe she'll want to in a couple of years, and in a couple of years it'll be fine. It's not like, oh, she didn't start, playing softball, or she didn't, start shooting at basketball at the age of 4, so she's lost out on 4 years. It's like, no, when she picks it up, like, I know she'll get it, and she'll get it to the degree that she wants to and needs to. And right now, the play that she's interested in and the way that she has fun just doesn't revolve around that. And I don't know how parents get to that point of pressuring kids to do it so hard, and maybe they just do it so early that the kid doesn't even realize they're getting pressured into it. But my parents never pressured me to do anything, and everyone always laughs because my dad would come to my games with like a book. And he would watch, and then he'd time out or halftime, pull his book out, and he'd be reading his book in between. And so, he never was one that was involved with the coaching staff and trying to tell them what I should or shouldn't be doing. Like, he never wanted to have influence on that.
Sure.
And it was just, and that's the approach I want to have too. I think that's a really great approach. Like, maybe if there's certain times, like coaching soccer, like that can be tough to watch sometimes, but I also don't know anything about soccer. So I'm just like, you know what, if they want to do this is their thing. I'm here to watch and spectate. But I think it could definitely be something that all parents take into consideration of like, this person is in this position, they're doing these things. Like, if you see it different, it's tough to bite your tongue, but maybe biting your tongue sometimes is better.
Sure. Yeah. So let's use that to kind of get to the last point of this conversation. Like, describe kind of some of the roles or things that you've done with programs that have been helpful, or that you're kind of trying to like work through. When you talk about like, okay, that's not my space to help out, I'm good with that, but maybe here is my space to help out. So just share like some of the things that have been working for you in that space.
Well, the first thing I think is always just being approachable in those situations. So I try to introduce myself to the staff, get to know them, get a little idea of what they want to do with their athletes and or like their program, and let them know like, hey, I'm here to help improve the athleticism and the strength and the quickness of your athlete. And so what can I do now? Like, what can I implement? Like, what do you see that maybe is failing or that you would like to see improvements on? Like, I've got a program. I know what I'm doing. I think our field is always tough because what everyone loves about our field is, like, their ego. And they love that, like, I made this program. This is the best program. And it's like, well, I think there's a lot of good ones out there. And I think there's a lot of different approaches that can be effective. So for me, it's just being able to work with that coach and that program and whoever's there. And where we see success is like when I get the feedback and I get people that understand that I'm a part of the team. Like, I'm here to help make sure this athlete gets to where they need to be. My goal isn't to come in and change anything or make it different. It's just to make it better. And so that's where I see a lot of success.
Cool. Yeah, I love that. And that's from the clinical or medical side of things. Communication, again, is like at the core of it too, for how we end up working with athletes. And a huge part of it is, again, making sure everybody's on the same page. Like, if I work with a college athlete at the clinic, that week I'm probably having a phone call with their parents just to let them know. Right? Because like some of these kids are not from anywhere near the Midwest, and like parents want to be a part of what's going on. We often will send a message to some of the athletic trainers or even a coach on staff, like if they need to. Sometimes these athletes need people to kind of vouch for them and say like, hey, this is what's going on. This is why we're trying to modify things so that we can get them better, so that they can get back and play.
Yep.
I'm not trying to tell a kid to take a day off of practice just for the sake of taking a day off of practice. And so it's kind of getting everybody at the table and then being able to like guide, and I don't want to say direct, but like tell them, hey, these are maybe the things that we should shy away from because of X, Y, and Z. Here's the things that maybe we should like double down on. And sometimes the double down on means maybe we should double down on our sleep for the next 2 days. Maybe we should double down on making sure that we're eating enough the next 2 days.
Yeah.
It's making sure that they have that balance to things. And again, growing up loving sports myself, the last thing that I want to do is take somebody out of practice, right, unless I feel like we need to. But there are times where we need to do that. So,
and that's a lot of, I feel like, where your field is a little bit different, because you're there to help like protect the athlete, because you're mostly seeing them if they have some kind of ailment or some kind of performance issue. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, my conversation is more of, how can we improve this? Like, what are we doing that, is going to match up well with play right now? Like, why are we in this microcycle or mesocycle, and what do we need to transition into and out of? Like, those kind of things. And I think they all play together. But yeah, your field comes a little bit differently, because it's probably mostly conversations about like, how can we help this athlete recover and avoid doing this again?
Yep. Yeah, and some of that is approach, right? Like, because I do get some athletes that are on the proactive side, and they're more or less reaching out saying, hey, I just need some support and guidance with this. Things aren't bad. I just don't want them to get bad. Yeah. And that's a really cool approach to see some younger people starting to have. I wish everybody had that approach at the clinic, just like I'm sure you wish everybody had that same approach at the gym. Like, don't you just wish people came to the gym and were like, yeah, I'm already healthy, but like, I just, I want to keep being healthy.
Yes.
We just don't live in that world.
No.
But it's like, part of your job is making sure that they are fit enough to climb the mountain. And part of my job is making sure that they don't fall off a cliff on the way up.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like this constant kind of back and forth, guiding, being flexible, being able to see the big picture, but then also to focus on the details. And when you can see people kind of put that together, like, those are the people that have a good experience. Those are the people that have like long careers, and then they finish their sport and then they continue to play it because they still love it, or because they still see all the pluses that they get out of that situation.
One, like my big thing too is you see some of these schools that are successful in their programs because they have these all-around athletes, right? Mm-hmm. These athletes that can get into volleyball, can get into basketball, can be football, basketball, or football, wrestling, whatever, their combination is. But that just brings the overall like athletic department up, because these programs are doing so much better from well-rounded athletes.
Sure.
And for me, you can avoid leaning on the standing out athletes. Mm-hmm. I see so much burnout, I just think, or overuse of some one or two athletes that are like that standout, that seem to be better than their peers, and then now you're leaning on them for scoring the touchdowns and having the high point average in basketball, or like it's just overuse, in my opinion, of these athletes, because you're not doing enough to focus on everyone. And I just think what I have termed like the team initiative is, how can we get everyone in this space, because you are vulnerable in the space of fitness in the weight room, and get comfortable with each other and building each other up there. Like, the most viral videos from college are the ones when they're trying to PR in the weight room, and you got the whole team there cheering them on. Right. It gives me like goosebumps just talking about it, because it's a fun environment. Like, you want that team there to support you. But if you don't ever try to build that from the base, if you don't have that going on, in the high school athlete aspect, like, these kids are just like, oh, he's going to lift because he's like obsessed with it. We're not going to go do that. Like, you get those kind of conversations, and it's like, no, he's going to lift because when he gets on the field, he wants to be able to protect you, or when he gets on the court, he wants to be able to keep up with the whole team. Like, we want to have everyone go together. And I get it's not everyone's passionate, not everyone loves to work out, or everyone loves to take care of their fitness or improve their performance. But if I can get them to go from like 50% effort to 60 or even 70% effort, well, yeah, we just had a substantial increase in terms of their performance, like a 20 to 30% increase of them just giving me a little bit more effort, which is in turn going to help everyone in the sport that they're in.
Yeah. It's like when you can make it about just the idea of building, right? Like build the experience, build the space, instead of it being just like the flashy, like, right? Like you can't show up to the weight room in like day one, strobe lights and people are getting pumped to PR. Like you don't get to start there.
No.
You create that meaning over time and like you set the table and then like boom, then you get to have your jam session at PR and people are pumped.
Intro to weightlifting or intro to performance should include, this is how you deadlift, this is how you bench press.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be, we're going to hit PRs here today on bench press, hang clean, front squat. What?
Right.
Like those are the things that like, I don't think you have a good plan. I say there's a lot of good plans out there. I think some people have like pretty effective approaches, but that is not an effective approach.
Right.
And so it's making sure you're balancing it. You're getting these kids in here, you're getting them excited about it. And to me, when those peer-to-peer interaction, like it would be fun to really like one thing I'm passionate about while being in these schools, because we work with 2 different schools right now, is getting these kids to then have peer-to-peer interaction. Like, okay, now you have, let's say, more of the leader of the team, the captain, if they've been designated to that title, they now are like, this is captain's lift. Okay, this is what we're doing, because that person responds so much better to their peer and their peer leading them through it and them, seeing them in there than they do to sometimes that, authoritative coach, trainer, parent kind of perspective.
Totally. Yeah, I remember from my college world that like one of my best competitors was also my teammate.
Yeah.
And in the sport of diving, it's an individual sport, but it's also a team sport. But like there would be days where I would show up to practice and would see the practice plan and think like, man, that doesn't look super fun. And then I'd watch my teammate get out of the pool after just like crushing through that workout. Then he'd be like, it's a good day. I'm like, all right, I guess I better do it today.
Here we go.
Chris did it, so I guess I'm just going to also do it too.
Yeah.
But it's like those examples end up being so powerful and create so much momentum, because now it's just inside the group instead of coaches or people outside the group trying to like get that going. Like when you can start the fire on the inside, then you solve a lot of.
Well, and you gotta make it cool too. Unfortunately, and it maybe was a group of friends and just when we were growing up, but like the one guy that was in that position for us wasn't that cool, and so unfortunately he ended up being the butt of a lot of jokes.
Sure.
And I look back at it now, I'm like, man, I quote that dude more than I thought I would have, later in my life. And I don't know if that makes me uncool, but probably. But for the most part, like it was just like he would come in and he tried to do that too, or he'd be like, hey, who's lifting here and who's practicing up? Like how do we get everyone to do that?
Yeah.
Why don't you guys want to do that?
Cool.
But yeah, I think that makes a big difference.
Okay. Cool. Thank you for your time.
You bet, man.
We'll do this again. Yeah, we'll pick another topic or something. Thanks for tuning in, people. JP Fitness, right across the street from the clinic.
There, right behind you.
Yeah, so you can either park in their parking lot and walk over, or park in our parking lot and walk over like I do.
Exactly.
But awesome. Well, till next time, have a good one.
Thanks.